Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi and we've got a historic Artisan Festival event coming starting on May the 1st. Here we are one day before this event is scheduled to start, and well, Wizards really hasn't told us very much about it. What we do know, of course, historic means virtually any card that has ever been made on Arena, with a few banned exceptions. Artisan means you can only play commons and uncommons, so a little contrary to what we just talked about. And of course, Festival means that you will probably have a one-time, fairly low entry, probably 2,500 gold or 500 gems, and you'll be able to play in the event as much as you want to. The event is probably going to be best of one matches, and wins in this event are most likely going to award cosmetics of recent cards from March in the Machine. And at some point, those cosmetic awards will run out, but you will be allowed to continue playing the event until I believe it's the 11th when it ends. One thing about this event that I think everyone should know is there is an opportunity to see and be part of blatant cheating in this event. And that is what we are going to talk about here for the rest of the video. So stay tuned. But before we get into all that, all these videos for the new sets, they take up an awful lot of time and have a very limited lifespan to be viewed. So do me a favor and hit that like button. It's what Mom would want you to do. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. All right. Before anybody gets too excited, when I'm talking about cheating, I'm not talking about something that is going to get you banned or suspended from the game, get you in trouble with your significant other, or any of that stuff. I'm speaking as a finance geek, accountant by trade. I'm talking about a perfectly legal loophole that you can exploit for your benefit, the way the founding fathers of America intended. I am, of course, talking about the spellbook function, which allows us to completely bypass the artisan restriction on this event. Because, of course, artisan just means you have to build your deck with commons and uncommons. You can't include rares or mythics. But spellbook allows you to get around that because those cards aren't in your original deck. They are added to your hand through the course of the game. And frankly, resolving one of these rares or mythics is generally enough swing in power in your favor to pretty much cinch up a game. So I am highly recommending this concept of cheating in order to maximize your results on this event. All right, so let's take a look at these spellbook cards that allow you to draft into the rares and mythics. The first up is Celestial Vault. This one has a little bit of a weird mechanic as you draft the spells in exile linked to the Celestial Vault itself, and then when you sacrifice the Celestial Vault, put all cards exiled this way into your hand. So it's an opportunity to, well, maybe get too greedy and allow your opponent to interact with the Celestial Vault and never get the cards. But with things like Angel of Destiny, Resplendent Angel, Righteous Valkyrie, Angel of Invention, Angel of Sanctions, Valkyrie, Harbinger. Let's see what else is in here. Resplendent Marshal, Enduring Angel, Sigardia Savior. I mean, there's some very good reasons here to maybe consider this, especially if you want to go with some sort of Angels Matters, or maybe even like a blue-white skies build. White continues to be a powerhouse, and I think one of the best cards here is Faithful Disciple. Not only is a 2/2 body with vigilance for 2 mana pretty good, it's in 2 relevant tribal things with humans and clerics, and when it dies, you draft a card from its spellbook. where you can get things like Anointed Procession, Cathar's Crusade, Authority of the Consuls, Sigil of the Empty Throne, Divine Visitation, Duelist Heritage, Glorious Anthem, Teleportation Circle, just a huge amount. Anointed Procession. Oh well, we're back to the beginning. At any rate, there's a lot of very good cards here that can definitely, even just one or two of those can really push you over the top if it happens to line up with what your deck is trying to do anyway. Experimental Pilot, I think, is one of the lesser ones here. Not only does it have a few less rares like Cultivator Caravan, let's see, what else have we got here? Mech Titan Core, both a little underwhelming. Reckoner Bankbuster is probably the best card you can get here, and that itself is really just a card draw mechanism in its own right. Mindlink Mech, Silent Submersible, both kind of underwhelming. And I think that's the only ones. Yeah, those are really the only ones there. So this is not real high up on my list. Breaking Expectations is similar. You can get access to Scepter. Let's see, what else we got here. Pyre of Heroes, Treasure Chest. Unfortunately, all of them are very situational and not great cards in their own right. Cursebound Witch is another one of the powerhouses here. This Witch's Vengeance is a great board sweeper and can be very one-sided. From there, we also get Curse of Leeches, and I think there's some other good stuff here. Cruel Reality, pretty nice. Yeah, that's all here for the overpowered card. And of course, Xander's Wake primarily gives you access to Thieves Guild Enforcer and Slaughter Specialist, which are both very nice cards for an alchemy style that only allows the commons and uncommons. Asylum Visitor is another. Big Spender is the last card here on the list, but these cards tend to be kind of situational. Treasure Vault, Gilded Lotus. I mean, if you can find a way to use something like Key to the City, it's very solid, but primarily it's just mana ramp and card acceleration, drawing cards, and a little less powerful in its own right. Oh, and I completely left out March Toward Perfection, a single black mana sorcery. You get a boon with when you cast your next Phyrexian creature spell, that creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter and a death test counter on it, and you draft a card from the spellbook. And the spellbook on this is kind of insane. Phyrexian Fleshgorger, Phyrexian Obliterator, Revoker, pretty decent still, and Archfiend of Dross can just end games. Zenith Chronicler is a little situational. Soulless Jailer, kind of a sideboard card in its own right. So many awesome cards here, and honestly, I think this is the one I'm going to build upon today. And here is what I came up with for this particular all-access event. Don't forget that it is all access, so whether you own these cards or not, this deck is 100% playable for you. Of course, we've got 2 copies of Cursebound Witch. We've talked about that card. Also 2 copies of Faithful Disciple, and 4 full copies of March Toward Perfection. Everything else in the deck is pretty much a Phyrexian. Crawling Chorus, 3 copies on that, 3 copies of Skull Dweller, and 3 copies of Ichor Drinker, all of which are just intended to get us a very quick board presence if we don't draw the March of Perfection as our turn 1 play. Our 2-drops are equally pretty recognizable. Jabo Duelist, just to give us a very solid board presence and aggro line here on turn 2, particularly if we are casting that off of a turn 1 march where you get that 2/2 thing going on. Phyrexian Missionary is one of the better 2-drops in our deck. A 2/3 with lifelink is pretty solid all on its own. And in late game, if you kick this, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, just allows us to renew and reuse our cards. And I think everybody is pretty familiar with Alyssa Elcor, the Sadistic Pilgrim. Legendary, so I'm only running 2 copies here, but a 2-mana 2/2 Death Touch is pretty good. And if you pay attention to the mana base when we go over it, you'll see that most of our mana base comes into play untapped. And in fact is somewhat slanted towards Phyrexians. So having this on turn 2 should not be terribly difficult. Our 3-drops and our single piece of removal in this is Annex Sentry, a 1/4 Phyrexian that allows us to deal with an artifact or creature of mana value 3 or less, and then puts the onus on our opponent to then deal with our Sentry in order to get it back. Phyrexian Censor is kind of a defensive piece here. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn. That basically has no effect on us. Non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped, so it allows our deck to take a real advantage on tempo here. Aaron, another Phyrexian and a legend. I'm running just 1 copy here. This is probably the hardest spell for us to cast on curve because of the double white. But a 3/3 Menace is pretty solid. And this allows us to functionally, potentially blank our opponent's removal. Because if they go to remove one of our creatures or they block effectively and we're going to lose a creature to combat that is totally one-sided, meaning they won't lose their creature, we can just sacrifice that creature to Aaron here and give our entire team +1/+1 in the form of a counter, so it's pretty permanent. Skitterfang, I think, is one of the best colorless Phyrexians in the game right now. 3-mana 2/2 is a little off curve, really. You're paying a bit of a premium here for 3 oil counters that come into play with it. But at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may remove an oil counter from Skitterfang. When you do, target creature you control gains your choice of Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, or Lifelink. So this just enables our entire board state, not just Skitterfang, to allow us to get in for very effective blocks, very effective attacks, not blocks. And that's really what this deck is all about, is just closing out in the combat zone before our opponent can really come together. One of our non-creature pieces here, of course, is Sculpted to Perfection as a 4-drop enchantment. When it ETBs, you incubate 2, so it does potentially affect the board state in the fact that you get a creature later on. And it also gives all of our existing and potentially future Phyrexians +1/+1 as a static effect. And a similar piece here is Seething Skitterpriest. It's a 3/3 for 4 with Toxic 1. We don't really lean too heavy into the Toxic in this deck, but it's certainly there and potentially worthwhile. When it ETBs, creatures you control and creature cards in your hand perpetually gain, when this creature dies, create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature cannot block. So just a nice way to potentially go wide on the board and, again, kind of blank out our opponent's removal. And, of course, if we were to sack something like Crawling Chorus, we'd get 2 Mights and double our power toughness on the board relative. And if we were to sack that using Aaron, well, now they're just making everything else bigger, and it can just be really good. So that's the mainstay of the deck. We are running 12 basic lands slanted slightly towards swamps. mostly because that is where the majority of our one-drop options are. We're also running 8 copies, effectively, of the same card: Secluded Courtyard and Unclaimed Territory. These both come into play untapped, but can really only be used for the creature type that's named. Obviously, we're going to go Phyrexians here. I mentioned earlier, Annex Sentry is really our only piece of real removal, and I certainly would not be offended if somebody wanted to drop some of the cards here and go with a little bit more removal package. The more non-Phyrexian creatures that you add in the form of, say, removal spells, the more you want to look at these 2 cards and maybe swap them out for other land options. And rounding out our, I believe it's 22 lands on this, we've got 2 copies of Gated Citadel. This is the only land that comes into play tapped for us. And this is here to allow us to get that Seek a Non-Land card late in the game to help us continue to build our board state if we start drawing dead. So overall, it's a deck that is a little tricky to pilot because it's all creatures, and you've really got to be confident and aggressive in your use of creatures and not be afraid to use your creatures as removal for your opponent's things. Of course, that also leaves you open to things like combat tricks and whatnot. So it's a fine line, but if you are the type of player that can pull it off, this deck should be very, very effective. If you aren't that style of player, or you don't have the experience yet to be that style of player, this is a great opportunity to practice this sort of deck. Or again, if you want to change up the card selections a little bit, you're not going to hurt my feelings, I promise. And folks, before you go, make sure you've subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on a thing. Because I know I can't change the Magic economy all by myself, but I think we can.